It's a good smelling book though. You know, you can kind of tell like when the font is that small, it's like that's going to be a nice and stanky one. What up? I'm Sam, and there's quite literally no one asking me to do this, but I'm a student and I should be working on my thesis. I don't want to. So instead, I'm going to tell you about the books that I read in January, which are mostly horror, mostly manga, with some YA and historical fiction sprinkled in there. So the first book that I read was Life as We Knew It by Susan Beth Pfeffer. And this is a book that I had actually never heard of, but my partner recommended it to me because he read it when he was a young adult in middle school. And this was definitely a new flavor of dystopian for me, which, you know, I don't really have a huge experience with the dystopian genre, but typically it's very action-packed. There's usually a corrupt government, things like that. But this is very much like it was more realistic. The story is told through a high school girl's diary entries, and this isn't by any means a spoiler because it's in the synopsis, but basically an asteroid hits the moon, and as you may know, the moon is responsible for weather and tides and a bunch of other things. I mean, we've all seen Avatar: The Last Airbender. We know the moon is important. So when an asteroid hits the moon and throws it off course, there are obvious catastrophic events that follow. So the story is really this girl and her family having to endure the consequences of this catastrophe. So yeah, it was realistic. It was a lot more realistic than a lot of other dystopians that I've read. I think that this could happen way before something like The Hunger Games, so that was interesting. And you know, uncomfortable, but in an interesting way. There is a lot of discussion of food insecurity and being hungry. So reading this book made me feel so hungry. So I guess eat before you read it if you're gonna try it out. But in overall, I thought that this was just fine. It is a good winter novel. I read it obviously in January, and a lot of the book is takes place in the wintertime. So this was a nice one to read in the winter. It was pretty slow paced, and I am a reader that prefers a faster pace. There are 3 books after this. It's a series, and I have opted to not read any more in the series because I just think this is a good stopping point for me. This is kind of all I need out of the series. But overall, I think it was just fine. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It pretty much delivered what I expected it to. But yeah, if you like young adult dystopian, you're interested in moon stuff, you're interested in slower paced stories, you should check it out. You might like it. Next is a manga series that I actually read volumes 31 through 45, but I only have 31, 32, and 33 right here. And that is Haikyu. Now wait. I can feel some of you like clicking off immediately because you're like, why the fuck are you talking about a manga about high school boys volleyball? And you know what? That's fair. That is fair. But this series is so good, and I'm going to be honest, I have lost the capacity to be objective about this series because I just love it so much. Do you ever get that where you just love a series or something so much and you get so attached that you just lose all ability to be objective? And that's the level I'm at with this. And this is actually a series that was serialized in Shonen Jump from 2012 to 2020. So I'm a little bit behind the times with this, which I admit. And I actually was introduced to this series first through the anime. The first season I watched, and I was hooked from the first episode. And again, it's like, what in the world would have even compelled me to watch an anime about high school boys volleyball? Which again, fair. Roast me. I get it. But the art style is so dynamic. The animation was amazing. The sound design was amazing. The characters are just amazing. I mean, I'm losing my vocabulary here because I just love it so much. I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about this because, like I said, it is an older series, but I love this series. I could go on and on about it. I could do freaking deep dive analyses of all the characters because while on the surface, this is a story about high school boys volleyball, it is so much more than that. And I'm not overstating when I say that this is some of the best character development in any form of media I've ever consumed. So I'm kind of insane. I think I'm going to watch this back and be like, what in the world? But I mean, you can talk to any of my in real life friends, which how would you know them? But if you did, you'd know I will not stop talking about this. And it's to the point, like, before this, you know how there's like these like really like people who are so into sports that they'll like riot after a game and they'll like cause bar fights if their team wins or they lose. I never really understood that, but like now I kind of get it, you know? I kind of get it because when Karasuno High School wins, that's a win for me too. When they lose, I cry. I cried. It's so okay. It's too much now. It's too much, and I get it. I feel it. We're done. I'm done talking about it. But Haikyu was the second thing I read. Obviously, I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. You can clearly tell because I'm an insane person. So read Haikyu. Okay, so we made it, guys. We made it through that. It wasn't that bad. I know some of you were like wanting to leave, but if you stayed, you made it. We're going to talk about some more horror, but before we get back to horror, the third thing I read was Memoirs of a Geisha, and I'm stalling on holding it up because this is a copy of the book that I've had since probably like 2005. So this is when I was a dumb kid. I mean, current day Sam, I'm pretty hard on books still, but like as a child, middle schooler, high schooler, I was just like really hard on books, especially books I owned. You know, library books I would be more respectful of. But the third thing I read was Memoirs of a Geisha. So for those of you confused, this no longer has a cover because it ripped off. This is what the spine looks like. It's pretty bad. There's a nice tear in the back cover. We got some stains, just general disarray. I'm hard on books. This is a copy I've had since, like I said, probably 2006, since I was in middle school. You know, this probably spent several months on the floor of my mom's car in the middle of a Wisconsin winter, you know, with our freaking salty, snowy boots just stomping on it. So yeah, I've read this before. Obviously, this was a reread. I really liked this as a child or as a middle schooler because reading about Asian culture was really intriguing to me. It was like very different from my perspective and like my experiences. So it was kind of like a form of escapism when I was a child. But also, I'm not gonna lie, it was like, oh my God, this is about a geisha. There's like sex stuff happening in here. You know, like when you're a middle schooler, it's like, oh my God, I can read about this stuff and my mom, you know, whatever. So when I was a middle schooler, I really liked this. It's still a pretty good story. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars as an adult. You know, now that I'm older and I know that it's written by a white dude, it's kind of like, what are you doing, Arthur Golden? You know? Like, what business do you have writing a memoir, a historical fiction about the life of a geisha? You know? Like, do you really? You really thought you had to contribute? So, you know, kind of take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's fun. It's an easy read. Again, it's like a nice little, you take a little trip out of your own perspective, out of your own world. I don't normally dabble in much historical fiction, but this was really good. So, if you're even remotely interested in like old-timey Japanese culture or geisha culture, while this is likely not the most accurate depiction, it's still fun. So, I recommend it if you're interested. I can loan you my copy. Just kidding. Probably don't want it. And I would understand. Okay, so coming in at number 4, this isn't a ranking, this is just the 4th book that I read. I don't actually own a physical copy of this because I'm a library bitch. And it's fine because I didn't really like this one, but the next one I read was The Ravens by Cass Morgan and Danielle Paige. And I didn't really like this one. So the synopsis is that there's a sorority in this university, which is actually a coven of witches. So I was like, cool. You immediately got my interest even just from that. It was told from 2 different perspectives. One being a woman who's already in the sorority, and then a young woman who's coming to college for the first time and she's rushing the sorority. So, okay, cool. We have these couple perspectives, and then the story kind of gets a little darker and there's, you know, more sinister forces at play and someone's out to get the sorority for some reason. So I was so hyped for this. I thought this was going to be kind of like a combination between Daughters of the Moon, which is an old YA series, basically just like young women with, the power of witchcraft and friendship. So I thought it would be like a combo of Daughters of the Moon and like the horror film Sorority Row. Are you guys familiar with that one? I'm a sucker for that one. I love a good slasher like that. And that's really what the synopsis built it up to be. So I had high hopes for this, but it ended up just being a 2 out of 5 for me, which a 2 for me is like bad, not like hate, but like bad. Like I expected more. It fell pretty flat for me. It kind of just felt pretty blah. Like there weren't really any memorable characters. I was able to guess who the villain was pretty early on. So yeah, check it out if you wanna. Don't if you don't wanna. The fifth book that I read this month was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid, and I liked this book. It was good. I do think my experience with this book was marred by the fact that I saw the film before I read the book. So I really did myself a disservice by doing that. So I guess for those of you who don't know, this book is about a woman going to meet her boyfriend's family for the first time. And things seem off. And she's thinking of ending things, like ending the relationship. And things seem off from the beginning, and then it just gets worse and worse. And this has a pretty kooky ending. That said, even though I knew how it was going to end, the way that it's written is really anxiety inducing, but in a good way. It's like it made me frantic to know what was going to happen, even though I already knew what was going to happen. So I think that that's a testament to Iain Reid's writing. But I really can't recommend the movie. I really didn't like the movie. I think the issue I have is with the director. I thought it was really pretentious and I didn't understand what happened at the end. Like it wasn't clear to me. I had to like look up, I'm thinking of ending things, ending explained. And it's like, why should I have to do that? Anyway, long story short, I am giving this one a 3.5 out of 5. It was good, but my experience was definitely dampened by the fact that I had seen the movie first, so I obviously knew what the ending was going to be. Okay, so the sixth book that I read was The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And this was a book that I actually found because of a recommendation of the YouTube channel Possessed by Horror. She recommended it, she really liked it. I was intrigued by it because it's a native horror story told by a native author. And it's about a group of 4 friends who have the shared trauma from when they were young adults. And then now it's following the 4 of these men as adults, and sort of the consequences of this event are finally coming to fruition. So the story was unlike anything I had ever read before, which is obviously a positive, but it was too slow paced for me. So I've already said I really prefer a fast paced book. Another thing that I didn't particularly like was the narration style. I don't want to say the writing style of Stephen Graham Jones because I think it really is like a me thing that it just like really wasn't for me. I did think that the narration style was a little too casual. I mean, everyone's so conditioned to having this like really smart, articulate narrator who's telling you exactly what's happening in perfect detail. So to have such a casual narrator was really tough for me. And there were some times where it was like even bordering on like nonchalant. So since it is such a casual narrator, there wasn't a lot of like cues that were like telling you like, yes, something is about to happen. It was like, to me it felt so sudden. Like suddenly this casual narrator would just be like describing this horrific thing happening, but it was said in such a nonchalant way that I wouldn't even realize something horrific had happened until like a paragraph down, and I'd have to like rush back and be like, wait, what happened? It's like it wouldn't click until a few sentences later. That said, the scenes of horror were awesome. I wish that there were more of them. The book talks a lot about middle school girls basketball. I didn't go back and count or anything, but I honestly think that there were more words devoted to discussing middle school girls basketball than there were describing these like horrific scenes. And I wanted more of the horrific scenes, I'm here for the horror. Overall, I think that this book just wasn't for me. And that's okay. This is a native story written by a native author. It wasn't written for me. But that's not to say that it's not a good story. It's it just wasn't for me, and it was a little bit harder for me to consume. I did really enjoy the ending of this, and overall, I think this was a positive experience. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since I completed it earlier this month, so I think that's also, I really think that that's a good sign when I read a book and I'm not able to stop thinking about it, whether that's, for a good or bad reason. I gave this one 3.5 stars out of 5, and I really don't want to deter you from reading it. If you're even a little bit curious, try it out, because I really want to hear what other people have to, think about this book. The 7th book that I read was The Troop by Nick Cutter. And this is another one that I think has been pretty popular in horror booktube. So some things that I love about this book. I love that it just tackles you from behind and you're just rolling. The story's going. It's like you're standing at the edge of the pool and you're like, some stories are like they'll let you dip your toe in, they'll let you slowly walk in. This one just like tackles you from behind and you're in it. This book is very obviously influenced by Lord of the Flies, and we are Lord of the Flies stands in this household. Lord of the Flies stands in this household, okay? This is one of the few classics that I love because it depicts so many horrific things. I mean, I'm not going to talk about Lord of the Flies, but I could, but I'm not going to. So yeah, we are Lord of the Flies stands in this household. So I had pretty high expectations of this book. I'm like that friend, like when my friends introduce their new significant others to me, it's like I don't try to be, but I baseline just like, I don't like you. Like starting out is like dislike, and you have to work your way up to like tolerating, and then like, okay, I like you. So that's sort of like the same energy I had with like going into this book. I was like, oh, you're gonna try and be like Lord of the Flies? Cool. Prepare to be disliked by me. You think you can be Lord of the Flies? Get real. And a few of the characters even seemed like clones of Lord of the Flies characters in the beginning. But then, that was not the case. And I actually really like this book. Like, I think I might love this book. So, yeah, I mean, this book really went through it. They really did it. So, like, good for them. They did it. I loved the character development over the course of the story. Obviously, I said that a few of the characters just seemed like clones of the Lord of the Flies characters. But then as, you got to know them more and you got to like read from their perspective, it was cool. They really distinct, their own characters. They were believable. You wanted to root for them. Shelley was my fave because I love a fucked up character doing fucked up things. I loved reading from the perspective of this disturbing lad. Loved it. The author also used newspaper articles, court proceedings, like psychiatry files to progress the story outside of what the characters who you were reading from the perspective of would know or be able to communicate to you. So I thought that was interesting. One con of this, which is like not even really a con, it's just, again, it's a me thing. It's me being so picky, but there is sort of like an evil scientist angle in this book. And I am currently about to be getting my PhD in molecular and cellular biology, so I'm something of a scientist myself. And I'm always really hard on any science that's depicted in books and movies because it's just so hard for me to suspend my disbelief because it's just so wrong almost every time. So the whole like evil scientists doing evil things and like being able to evade any sort of punishment or consequences is just really unrealistic, especially when it comes to human subjects. So at first I was like, this isn't good. But then at the end, like when you finally know the full story, I was like, yeah, that could happen. Yeah, that could happen. Unfortunately, it could happen. So this was my first Nick Cutter book, and I will for sure be reading more of his work. I really, really enjoyed this. Definitely check this one out. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Boom. 8th book I read was another low. We had another valley. You got to take the highs and the lows together. So the 8th book I read was Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters by Emily Roberson. And this one got a 2 out of 5. I was going between 2 and 2.5 because I think it was like maybe a smidge better than The Ravens. But then I was like, no, it's pretty much the same. So 2 out of 5. This book, again, I had pretty high hopes for because it was basically a story that was told as if, like, if reality TV existed during the time, like during mythological times, which is like, okay, super cool. You could do a lot of things with this. You could make it really interesting. I'm a mythology bitch, so yes, I'm all for it. It was a cool concept, but just not executed well. The story shines a light on a lot of important issues like misogyny, rape culture, sexual harassment, and a lot of others. But it kind of just like mentions them in passing and then doesn't do anything to address them in the story. So it felt very trite. Also, this is supposed to be a romance, but I thought that the romance was pretty bland. Again, I'm not normally a romance person, so maybe it is just me being like mean, but I thought the characters were pretty bland. And honestly, they were just like two supporting characters that I thought were more interesting than the main character. I thought that the Minotaur and one of the main character's sisters was more interesting. So yeah, 2 out of 5. I don't know, maybe skip this one, or I don't know. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but that's what I have to say about it. And then number 9. Oh my gosh. Okay, so we had a valley and now we're back at a peak. So this is actually a recommendation that I got from another booktuber whose channel name is Mickey's Book Vlogs. I'll link it below. The series is called Stalking, and this is actually a Korean manhwa by the author named Koogi. And this might be like one of the best things I've ever read. It was very much, it had a lot of themes and elements that I really like. So I think it just like really scratched an itch for me. It was so good. I really loved it. So this was a webtoon published in Legend Comics from 2017 to 2019. And I will say this series is not for everyone. This is very extreme horror, very disturbed people doing disturbing things, graphic depictions of pretty much any awful thing you could conceive of doing to a person. Unresolved trauma being weaponized to traumatize others. Just, it's real brutal. So I'm about to gas this series up so much, but it's like, please take it with a grain of salt. It is very extreme. Please be careful with yourself and check all content warnings before deciding to proceed with this series. And I would say if you are a baseline sensitive person, to maybe just skip this one. So now on to gassing up. The art is gorgeous, but what it depicts is brutal. It is brutal. I mean, you can just tell from the cover of the first volume that the art style it's gorgeous. The art is dynamic and engaging. It is just a joy to look at. Even when it's portraying something horrific, there's something so beautiful about it. And you get like this cognitive dissonance of like, why does this look so pretty? But it's like so effed up. What is happening? But I love that. I love making my brain feel new things, you know? The author does a fantastic job of building tension until revealing or unveiling a horrific scene. And it reminded me a lot of Junji Ito's use of page turners, in which he would do the same thing. He'd build up a scene and then you would turn the page and there would be this bam, like horrific image staring you in the face, but it's like so beautiful you can't look away. Page turners are basically the literary equivalent of a jump scare, but less cheap and more well done. I really enjoyed the exploration of the two main characters' pasts. So we were able to see what happened to them that sort of like made them this way. Why are you this way? You know? And then it answered that. Probably my absolute favorite element of this series is how the author drew faces. I think it's the most disturbing element of all. So again, while the author was exploring these characters' pasts, it was like you were experiencing it through the memory of the character. So things were fuzzy. The other characters' faces were kind of blurry up until a really key event or sort of like the peak of the trauma. And then you would see the traumatizer's face come into full focus in like excruciating detail. The art is beautiful, but once you saw the real face, it was almost like, oh my God, I've seen too much. And then it made you like want to go back, but it's like, there's no going back now because you've seen too much. It was so effective at making this story feel so ominous. And it really made you feel like you saw something you weren't supposed to see once their real face came into full view. and it was just like so jarring. I thought it was just really interesting because if you were, this character remembering your traumatic past, you probably would misremember a lot of things or not be able to remember people's faces super well. But there would be like key parts of your past where you would remember in like perfect detail. And especially traumatic events, you can remember like such small details. So I thought it was extremely effective. I am absolutely going to be rereading the series. It doesn't really have readily available physical copies, so I did just have to read this online on Legend Comics. But I think an English release of the first volume of the series is going to be released in June, so I already pre-ordered that. I love this, and I cannot thank Mickey's Book Vlogs enough for recommending it because I loved it. So the 10th thing that I read was Audition by Ryu Murakami. And this was pretty good. This is pretty highly lauded in the horror community, I would say. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was good. So this is about a widower who holds a fake movie audition to find a new wife. And I gotta say, this was my first time reading Ryu Murakami. So I don't know if this is like something he does on purpose as like a critique, but his writing style is like super male gazy. And it just made me hate the main character. It's like this 40-something-year-old widower who has a teenage son. And he's trying to get with this like early to mid-20s, beautiful, classically trained in ballet woman. And it's like, dog, what are you bringing to the table for this hottie? Like, why would this hottie be caught dead with you? You suck. I know because I'm in your head and you suck. So I don't know. Again, this is my only Ryu Murakami that I've read. I do plan to read some more because he is supposed to be like this really good horror author. But yeah, I just didn't like the male gaze perspective. I don't need that in my life. I do wish it had ended differently. It's pretty short. It's like a novella, so you can finish it pretty quick. I do wish it had ended differently, but it was overall good. And it also has a movie adaptation that I've never seen, so I do really want to watch the movie because that's also supposed to be really good. Next, I read Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which has a freaking gorgeous cover. I mean, can we just agree? It's a pretty short little bab. She's a short one, so this is definitely a novella. The cover got me, But also, there's one line from the synopsis. What have you done today to deserve your eyes? And that is just like so heavy metal. And like, that's a threat, I like that. That's good. So that really sucked me in. Basically, this follows 2 young women who meet on an internet chat room or internet forum, and then the whole story is told through their exchanges between email and an internet chat room. The story is fast-paced, and I got sucked in right away, and I read it in one sitting, which I recommend doing since it is so short. I loved the idea and setup of this story, but I do wish it was just a little bit longer. The strength of the story is that it really captures that feeling of being lonely and young and unsupervised on the internet. I can remember back in the early to mid 2000s when I was like, talking to freaking strangers on the internet unsupervised because it was the early 2000s and we didn't know better. So yeah, its strength is that it captures that, and it captures how exciting it feels to finally find someone who you think is a kindred spirit, but then also like someone who could possibly be interested in you romantically. It's like my inner emo 14-year-old self is like, yeah, I felt that. So that made it realistic. I think that this is something that could have really happened. I mean, some parts, let's not get ahead of ourselves. However, the relationship between the characters, I think, escalated way too quickly. And I think if the story had been a bit longer, it would have progressed a bit more organically. I also hated that the characters wrote to each other so formally. This was, again, all supposed to be via email and internet chat rooms. And like, obviously it was pleasant to read these fully formed, like, prose sentences. But you're telling me 2 young women in the early 2000s on an internet chat room with the username Agnes in Wonderland 76 did not use a single LOL, G2G, smiley face? That kind of bugged me because it's like so far removed from like what these conversations would have actually been. Maybe I'm nitpicking, but yeah, that really bugged me. Honestly, this is just such a wild ride. The cover's gorgeous. It's short. It ended unexpectedly. I'm keeping this one, and I'll probably revisit it eventually sometime in my lifetime. It's freaking weird. Plain and simple, and I like freaking weird stuff. So I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. 5-star cover though, let's be honest. The 12th thing that I read was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. Another gorgeous cover, but the story was bad. So this is a story about a reunion of old friends who meet at a haunted Japanese mansion to celebrate the wedding of their two friends. So I just wrote some bullet points for this because that I wanted to address. What's with the weird sexual tension? I don't know about you guys, but like my friend group, there's not as much intermingling as there is discussed in this friend group. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm the weirdo. I love shitty people doing shitty things, but this book just is about shitty people doing nothing. So it's boring. They're like the worst kind of shitty people who are just like whiny. So it makes you want to root against them. I don't care about you. Just bad, really. My recommendation is that you pick up a copy of this book at your local library or locally owned bookstore. Admire the cover for as long as you need to, and then just put it back and leave, because the cover is the only redeeming quality of the story. I said what I said. I'm not pulling any punches. Last but not least is another young adult, but this time is young adult fantasy. I read Sabriel by Garth Nix. This is another book that I have had from my childhood, from my middle school days. So yeah, this is an older series. I really like this series though. I'm very, have a lot of nostalgia for this since I read it as a middle schooler. So this is set in a world where necromancy is a thing that is real. And necromancers can raise armies of dead to do their evil doing and, ruin the kingdom, etc. But there is one necromancer called the Abhorsen who uses the powers of necromancy to fight against all of the other evil necromancers, and instead uses necromancy to put dead spirits to rest. The story is told from the perspective of Sabriel, who is the daughter of the Abhorsen, and she has to find her father, who is missing in action, basically doing his Abhorsen duties. And there is this evil rising up in the kingdom that she's got to figure out what's going on. Where's her dad? What happened? Normally, I don't gravitate towards young adults in general, but especially young adult fantasy isn't normally my cup of tea. But this has just enough death, necromancy, evil, creepy shit that keeps me interested. So I think if you're also like me and you're not really a huge fantasy person, but you're a horror bitch, you might like this. You might like this. This is obviously a reread for me. I'm revisiting this series. It's a trilogy, or it was a trilogy when I was a young lass. But now there are 2 additional books and a prequel, which I have checked out from the library. So yeah, I finished this. I'm going to be reading the rest of the trilogy in February. And then there are 2 more, Clariel and Golden Hand. And then there's also a prequel, Terciel and Eleanor. I'm revisiting the series just so I can kind of have a refresher, so I can read all these new books that have come out since I read the series. With that, that's everything that I read in January. In total, with all the manga and the manhwa, it was 30 books. So, wow, big nerd. Woohoo! I guess let me know if you like roast me in the comments if I said bad opinions or something, I guess. Or let me know if you liked what I liked. I guess I don't really know how to film an outro. Bye.